Most people think shadow work is a healing ritual, a trend, a path to peace. But Carl Jung warned, it could just as easily destroy you. This video explores intense psychological themes. If you're currently in therapy or doing shadow work, please watch with care. Shadow work is trending, but it's not what most people think it is. Because the shadow self isn't just your trauma, it's the version of you you're afraid to meet. Jung believed that confronting it without preparation could do real psychological damage. He believed that we all carry a hidden self, a version of us built from everything we reject, repress, or refuse to acknowledge. Our anger, our jealousy, our shame. Most people try to ignore it, but it doesn't disappear. It lingers, quietly shaping your reactions, your relationships, your identity. And when those repressed parts start operating like a fragmented personality of their own, some psychologists refer to this as a shadow complex. It's not a term Jung used himself, but it captures what happens when the shadow stops hiding and starts leading. This is where shadow work begins, not as a self-care trend, but as a psychological excavation. And sometimes, you don't like what you dig up. Have you ever hated someone instantly and couldn't explain why? That might not be your intuition, that might be your shadow. The shadow hides by turning our flaws into theirs. We project what we deny in ourselves, jealousy, weakness, rage, onto others. The coworker you think is manipulative, the influencer you call fake, the friend you silently resent. They might be mirrors. One man cut ties with every friend who made him feel small. But in therapy, he realized it wasn't their confidence that bothered him. It was his own insecurity, too shameful to face, so his mind made it their flaw. Projection is how the shadow controls perception. It makes you think the enemy is out there, when it's been you all along. And projection doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes it looks like obsession. A woman becomes fixated on a confident coworker. She thinks she admires her, but underneath is buried envy, a part of herself that wishes she could be bold, expressive, visible. The shadow doesn't just make us hate others. It can also make us worship them. We idealize what we disown, turning it into fantasy, fixation, or resentment in waiting. That's the terrifying part. Projection isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. It cloaks itself in logic, in gut feelings, in stories we tell about other people. And over time, those stories start to rewrite our reality. We lose track of what's real, what's fear, and what's buried so deep, we forgot it ever belonged to us. The shadow doesn't need to control you with force. It just needs you to keep looking away. Jung believed the shadow wasn't a single mask. It was a whole drawer of them, each tied to a different fear or wound. Before we name the types, it helps to understand where they come from. These shadows don't emerge from nowhere. They're forged in childhood, through pain, pressure, and patterns we were too young to question. They're fragments of a hidden system, stitched together without your permission. The shadow doesn't follow logic. It contradicts itself. It wants and fears the same thing. It says I'm fine while vibrating with rage. It loves quietly while lashing out. That's because it isn't one wound, it's a tangle, made of unmet needs, disowned instincts, and desires you were punished for having. And here's the twist. Some of the traits buried down there, they're not monstrous, they're magnificent. Fierce honesty, wild creativity, fire you were told to smother. But they went into the dark anyway. The egotistical shadow is often born when a child is only praised for success or punished for vulnerability. They learn to build armor, charm, dominance, even cruelty, to avoid the unbearable shame of feeling worthless. The neurotic shadow forms in chaos. When a child grows up in instability, emotional, physical, or both, they become obsessed with order. Control becomes safety. Perfection becomes survival. The wrathful shadow usually begins with betrayal, repeated hurt without explanation. These wounds don't heal, they hide, and in hiding, they sharpen. The distorted shadow, often the most taboo, can result from deep violation, abuse, neglect, trauma that fractures how a person relates to desire, power, and trust. It doesn't excuse harm, but it explains its roots. These aren't quirks, they're survival tactics. But over time, the mask becomes the face, and you forget who you were without it. And here's where it gets darker. These shadows don't just shape your personality, they build your identity. You might think you're a perfectionist because you just care a lot. But beneath that could be a neurotic shadow terrified of losing control. You might think your anger is righteous, but it could be the wrathful shadow, carrying decades of betrayal, real or perceived, that never got a voice. Even humor can mask a shadow. The constantly sarcastic friend? It could be armor for vulnerability they swore no one would ever see again. Each shadow adapts to survive. But what happens when survival becomes your default setting? You live your life through masks you didn't know you were wearing, and eventually, they stop coming off. So now I want to ask you, honestly, which shadow speaks to you the loudest? Is it the ego that hides your shame behind a smirk? The neurotic urge to control every detail just to feel safe? The wrath that lashes out before anyone can get close? Or something darker, something that feels almost inhuman? Jung said individuals aren't the only ones with shadows. Societies have them too. And when a group denies its collective flaws, it finds someone to carry them. History is full of these projections. Nazi Germany's racial scapegoating, the Salem witch trials, modern hate movements fueled by fear and blame. We bury our guilt, then dig it back up in someone else's face. That's the danger. When the shadow isn't seen, it becomes a story, a law, a war. But this isn't just history. The collective shadow lives in algorithmic echo chambers, in political extremism, in the way a crowd can dehumanize in seconds. Think of how quickly blame spreads, how easy it is to say they're the problem. The moment we identify an enemy, we stop asking hard questions about ourselves. And then, it feels good. It feels righteous. Jung warned that collective shadows are seductive. They give us a sense of belonging, purpose, even moral clarity. But they feed on fear, projection, and disowned pain. When people unite around what they hate, not what they love, the shadow is at the wheel. You don't need monsters when humans forget who they are, because we become them. If this is hitting close to home, you're not alone. Subscribe for more deep dives like this, and like this video to tell the algorithm, more please. PsycKeys is where we look into the dark and come back wiser. So what happens when you never face it? It doesn't stay buried, it waits, it grows, until one day, it breaks the surface. A woman, always calm and collected, finds herself screaming at her child in a way that terrifies her. She doesn't recognize the sound of her own voice. A man who prides himself on being kind punches a stranger in traffic. He calls it a blackout. His hands moved before he had a thought. Moments like these feel supernatural, but they aren't. They're the result of the shadow slipping through the cracks. The ego can't contain it anymore. The mask falls and what's underneath takes the wheel. Jung didn't believe in possession in the demonic sense. He believed the psyche could fragment, that the self could split if what's buried becomes too large to hold. The shadow becomes autonomous, a force that moves through you like instinct, bypassing your values, your choices, even your memories. One patient described it like this: I watched my hands do something I swore I'd never do, and I felt nothing. That's not madness. That's the shadow taking form. You don't need a ghost haunting your house. You need only the parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge, because if you bury them long enough, they come back, and they remember everything. So why even try shadow work? Why face what you've buried? Because denial is more dangerous. Shadow work is not about becoming good. It's about becoming whole. It means looking at the ugliest parts of yourself and saying, I see you. I won't let you rule me. But I won't pretend you don't exist. But here's what most people don't tell you. Shadow work can destabilize your identity. It can pull you into emotional territory you're not ready to navigate. It's not uncommon for people to fall into deeper anxiety, confusion, even dissociation when they begin this journey without preparation. You're not confronting a ghost. You're confronting the parts of you that were created to protect you from humiliation, abuse, rejection, powerlessness. So when you threaten to dismantle them, they fight back. The shadow isn't evil. but it is primal. And primal energy doesn't care about your schedule, your coping tools, or your desire to just feel better. This is why Jung insisted on integration, not elimination. You don't destroy the shadow. You learn to live with it. You give it a name, a space, a boundary. And in doing so, you gain something most people never will. Clarity, depth, power without cruelty, compassion without delusion. You walk into yourself armed with the truth, and for the first time you stop being haunted. Not because the shadow is gone, but because it no longer has to hide. If this made you uncomfortable, that means your shadow heard it, and that's not a bad thing. So ask yourself, what part of me have I never dared to meet? If the shadow is everything you've buried, then who would you be if you unearthed it all? Not the version you show to the world, not the version you edit in your head, but the whole self, the jealous one, the vindictive one, the part that fantasizes about control, about destruction, the part that cries when no one is looking, and the part that doesn't feel anything at all. What happens when you stop pretending those parts are gone and start listening to them? Some people spend their entire lives trying to be good. But wholeness, that's different. Wholeness means owning every shade of your being, even the ones that make you uncomfortable, even the ones that make you human.